Go.
Good afternoon. My name is Jack Cummings, and I'm the co-founder and artistic director of Transport Group Theater Company. Thank you so much for joining us today for this conversation between director and professor Kathryn Ervin and playwright Harrison David Rivers. I'm going to start things off by introducing Kathryn. Kathryn Ervin is a past president and current consultant for the Black Theater Network, where she received the Lifetime Member Award in 2010. Recently, she was inducted as a fellow in the Kennedy Center American Theater College of Fellows. A graduate of both Wayne State University and Illinois State University, Kathryn is currently a professor of theater at California State University at San Bernardino. As a director, among her most recent work are productions of In the Heights, Once on This Island, and Invisible, based on The Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison and H.G. Wells. Her production of the hip-hop opera Keep Heads Ringin' was part of the NYC Hip Hop Theater Festival. She is also the author with Ethel Pitts Walker of An African-American Scene Book. We are so grateful to have her here with us today, and please welcome Kathryn Ervin.
Good morning or afternoon. It's morning in California. I am delighted to be here. Thank you so much to the Transport Group Theater for the invitation to be part of this conversation. I especially want to shout out Jack Cummings, Maggie Wilson, Denise Dickens, and Hannah Oren, the amazing stage manager who is helping us with this conversation today. The Black Theater Network, a national organization of artists, scholars, educators, and individuals with an interest in the Black theater, serving the Black theater for over 30 years. And Marcia Pendleton at Walk Tall Girl Productions, who is an outstanding and upstanding member of the Black theater community. It's my privilege today to be talking with Harrison David Rivers. Harrison is the playwright of the current production or past production at Transport Group Theater, Broadbend, Arkansas. And that production is available streaming now. And you are asked to make contributions to the Black Theater Network to support Black theater artists everywhere, especially through the Transport Group Theater. Harrison, David Rivers, is the winner of the 2018 Relentless Award, a New York Fringe Excellence in Playwriting Award, an Adelco nomination for Best Play. The list is very long, and I really want to spend our time talking with Harrison David Rivers. So, Harrison, good afternoon.
Hi, hello.
I am so excited to be here because, first of all, Broadbend, Arkansas, if you haven't seen it and you're watching, let me encourage you to take an opportunity to see the show because it's really quite amazing. You are one half of the writing team.
Yes.
And we want to talk a little bit about the project itself and how did you come to the project? I will say that it is a 2-act musical with 2 characters. The first act is set in one time period. The second act is set in the current time. You go.
Sure. So back in 2016, Ted Shin, who composed the music for both parts of Broadbend, reached out through the public theater, and he had already written part 1, just one cue, and I went to see it. We had breakfast together and sort of talked about his thoughts about an act 2. He felt like there were still some themes that he wanted to continue to explore. And so during that breakfast, he introduced me to Ruby, who is the protagonist of Act 2, who is the daughter of the protagonist, Benny, of part 1. And so he gave me a kind of outline, sort of things that he thought might be interesting to explore, details that he had pulled from part 1 that he thought it would be great if those pulled through Act 2. And so I sort of started from there, from this sort of rough outline. I attempted to craft the story of a woman who is between a rock and a hard place. Her son has been beaten by a cop, and she doesn't know what to do about it. She doesn't know what to say. She doesn't know both how to comfort and to sort of push him forward. And so she takes a moment to sort of figure out her next steps. And so Act 2 is her sort of going back into her own past in order to then know how to move forward.
And I have to tell you how much I appreciated your attack on the play, that on the act. Both acts sort of launch immediately. There is very little exposition. We are thrown right into the middle of the conversation.
Yeah.
And then what made you think of the character goes from the hospital directly to the cemetery? So now where did that come from?
Well, yeah, I mean, that was in Ted's original outline. He thought we should set it in a cemetery. And what I love about it is that a cemetery is such a place of history, of memory, and she goes to a place of memory. The mother is buried, and part of, I think, the conversation in Act 2 is her sort of speaking to them as if they are going to be able to give her some wisdom moment. So, to me, it felt very powerful to go to that place of history and memory, and a kind of attempt to reconnect with one's ancestors, and a hope that they will reveal wisdom. They will reveal a kind of truth that will help you sort of be in the moment today.
It's wonderful storytelling. And I so appreciated the sense of ancestors in the story, around the story, and the way that the way that we learn about the characters through her reconnection to them. It's really, really wonderful. So you came to this, this is a musical, and you are a playwright.
I'm a playwright.
Lyricist.
Well, it's funny because I would not consider myself a lyricist, but the way that Ted allowed me to approach this project was that I would write a monologue for Ruby, and then he pulled musical material, lyric material from my text. So I got to be a lyricist. By the time we were in the rehearsal room and rewriting and sort of reshaping, I was actually writing lyrics. So it was a nice new challenge for me.
Is this your first time working in this kind of way with a composer?
It is. I mean, I've worked on musicals before, but I've been solely the book writer. And while there's always a real strong back and forth, I think in a musical theater collaboration, you can't do it alone. It takes a team. This is the first time where it's been that intimate where the words are concerned. And there's a real intimacy to the process. And I think there's a real intimacy to the result. I think the musical is deeply personal. It's a show that feels like you're being sung to directly, I think, which is, I think, part of its power. I think that sort of like one-on-one, hello, you're here with me and I'm going to tell you a story just to you, like you right there. I think there's something really powerful about that.
In both acts of the piece, we feel very much like we're in the presence of great storytellers, and the two performers are.
Oh my goodness. Justin and Danielle are, I mean, they're sort of unreal. And I think that both of them, in addition to being incredible performers, were also brilliant collaborators. And both Benny and Ruby were so powerfully influenced by their own experiences, their own skills and talents, their willingness to engage with us in conversation about like this moment and that moment, and like what feels true, what feels right. It was a really beautiful collaboration, really based on like listening and responding, which was a joy to be a part of, that kind of incredible back and forth.
Did you have an opportunity to work with the writer of the first act?
We were all in the room together. It was great. Ellen came to New York City and was in the room with us, and we were all sort of toiling together to bring two pieces which were created independently of each other, but then were sort of fused together during the rehearsal process. So Ellen was certainly a part of sort of pulling it all together. And I learned so much from her. I mean, speaking of just sort of, not so much ancestors, but like intergenerational collaboration and being able to be in a space with Ellen, who is a powerhouse in and of her own right. I mean, deeply skilled playwright and lyricist, and to watch her work and to see her discipline and to have her sort of blessing and encouragement, you know, in my sort of first foray doing something that she does so innately was, it was a gift. It was a real gift.
Now your website, and I didn't read all of the wonderful, your wonderful biography and credits.
Really no
they can be found on your they can be found on your website, but your introductions to your plays are very poetical. So are very poetic, very lyric. So talk a little bit about yourself as a writer. Are you poet? Are you,
Sure.
I mean, what's going on over there?
I'm not a poet. I mean, when you look at my work on the page, it is situated on the left side. So it often looks perhaps like a poem, short phrases. I write the way that I hear. So like rarely do I use periods. Rarely do I use any kind of punctuation at all. It's more about how the words flow down the page. I think some actors really get it, and some actors are like, where's the period? But there's definitely a sense of lyricism, a kind of heightenedness to the way that I write, which perhaps does in a way lend itself really well to musical theater, that there is a sort of tumble into song when it's musical theater. I think in my plays, it's typically a tumble into dance, or tumble into silence. Yeah, I think there is a kind of lyrical quality and a heightenedness to all of the work that I do.
So how did you start writing? And who were your influences? Where'd you come from?
Yeah, well, you know, so I was born and raised in Manhattan, Kansas, which is like a college town in Kansas. It's 2.5 hours west of Kansas City, and my grandmother was a librarian. She was a reference librarian, and I spent a lot of my growing up years like hanging out in the library. And I found the drama section pretty early on in my life and was deeply inspired and moved by Angels in America, particularly. Actually, one of my very first full-length plays was about my sort of obsession with Angels in America in high school. And just sort of that feeling that you feel when you read something and you feel seen, like a part of you feels very seen, and the queer part of me felt very seen, just like looking at the cover of that play. Like the cover did it, the title did it, and then I opened those pages and I was like, wow. So that's sort of like where, I don't know, my interest in plays began. I acted in high school and in college, and then developed sort of crippling stage fright right before my senior thesis project, which was an acting project. I got through that, but realized that like maybe being on stage under the spotlight was not the best place for me. I moved to San Francisco after graduation, still sort of trying to figure out like what exactly do I want to do in the theater. And I started hearing voices that didn't seem like they were mine. And I thought maybe I had snapped a tether, and that perhaps in my sort of desire to not go home, I had like made a huge mistake. So I called my mother from San Francisco, and my mother answered the phone and said, "What's up?" I said, "You know, I am hearing voices. I think there's something wrong." And my mom said, "Well, have you tried writing down what the voices are saying?" And I said, "Oh no, I hadn't really thought of that." So I started writing down what the voices were saying, and that became my first full-length play. Um, so that's sort of how I mean, I had always sort of written, but like more like lists. I was a list maker and like like lists of observations, but never really anything substantial. So that was my first full-length play. I applied to grad schools just because I had a play, and ended up going to Columbia University for playwriting, which is where I guess really figured out like what I wanted to be doing and how to do what I really wanted to be doing. I had the privilege of studying with Chuck Mee while I was there, and Chuck was like, everything's a play. It's all a play. All of it's play. And that was really reassuring to me that he made space for me to explore, a space for me to tell the kinds of stories I wanted to tell, encouraged me to tell the kind of stories I wanted to tell. And so that was I think a real formative time for me, those 3 years.
Wow. So I have to point out that it's so funny you mentioned the library. We were talking to Woody King at the beginning of This is Black Theater Week that the BTN is producing. And one of the things that Woody King talked about in his past was his connection to the Azalea Hackley collection, the library in Detroit, and how important finding those authors and finding those voices that speak to you. Are there other authors you want to name that you love to read, or that you I don't know how much reading you're doing now, but
I've like on the more recent side, like I really am inspired by Zadie Smith. I think that her storytelling is impeccable. Of course, like James Baldwin is someone that I constantly go back to. When I was interviewing for a scholarship for college, I met with a professor who recommended Ann Petrie's The Street.
Oh yes.
And that book has always been sort of a touchstone for me. Like I come back and back and back to that book. Invisible Man, Ralph Ellison, which has already been mentioned, was like a frequent read of mine. The Learning Tree, I read in high school and sort of blew my mind. The Color Purple, Alice Walker. So I mean, I think that there are sort of some of these like great novels that I think, maybe a lot of us read, but they are so personal. Like what they do for us, how they resonate for us as individuals is feels singular, like, sure, you read The Color Purple, but I read The Color Purple, right? The Color Purple did XYZ for me, and it did 1, 2, 3 for you. And like, it's great that it is able to move us all in those very different ways and propel us forward.
Yes, yes. I also think it's intriguing that you said you were a list maker, and well, the idea of the words jumping around on the page, and the words as an invocation of memory, the words as a way of organizing, the words as and that. Now I haven't had the opportunity to read your other works, but certainly that seems to be there. The other thing that's striking is this notion of history. And I was looking at the description of your plays, and several of them are investigations of history. Broadbend, Arkansas, She Would Stand Like This, which is a retelling of the Trojan women, and then 5 Points, which is set sort of
during the Civil War.
During the Civil War. So talk a little bit about how history draws you, and what happens when you get into those other kinds of times.
Sure.
As well.
Well, I love history. In high school and middle school, I participated in National History Day. And so every year I did like a big history project that culminated in some sort of performance. And in college, I was an American Studies major as well as a theater major. So sort of how we came to be where we are today has always been intriguing to me. I've always been interested in sort of like how we got here. And then also like, what don't we know about that journey? Where are the sort of lapses in the historical record? And how do we bring those to the forefront? So I think that a lot of the pieces that I end up either being asked to join or initiate myself are rooted in a kind of historical moment. I mean, 5 Points is set in 1863 during the Civil War, and it sort of talks a bit about the draft riots that adversely affected African Americans in sort of lower Manhattan in New York City. But it's also about the birth of tap dance and the fusion of sort of Irish step dance and Juba dancing from the Black community. And it's really a hopeful father-son tale. And she would stand like this, which is like really, really a heart piece, is a piece that I developed with the Movement Theater Company in New York City, with director David Mendizabal, which, you know, began as a series of monologues. It's kind of a funny story. He was a directing intern fellow at the Williamstown Theater Festival one summer. And he called me and said, there are these 3 beautiful actors, all men of color, and I want to give them something. I want to give them a present. I want to so can you write me something? Write me something for these 3 men. And so I wrote a series of monologues about mothers. So each man gets to talk about his mother. There are mothers in all of my plays, mothers and grandmothers. There's just something, I mean, I love my mother. One of my grandmothers recently passed away. So that sort of spirit of like the maternal it runs through me. So I wrote these interlocking monologues, and then we were like, I think it's something bigger. So we were trying to figure out where it might fit, and it felt like the Trojan women's story felt like a good fit. So it became this story of a house mother with her children in a waiting room at a hospital, sort of trying to find out or waiting to find out about a diagnosis. Something is wrong in the community. What is it? We don't know, and we're waiting. I mean, and we don't ever say that it's HIV, that it's AIDS, but that is sort of the implication. So, you know, also rooted in a historical moment, that's like rooted in a historical moment.
Right. How, and that is a wonderful, eloquent take on where we are right now in this historical moment, is this notion here in California, they're passing the ethnic studies in the curriculum. That is a large talking point. And this idea of going back and revisiting history and finding out who's missing, and lifting those stories up, because, and even, you know, there's a running joke around my house about Hamilton and how mad it's made me at the current government, because it's not like the musical, and it really should be, you know, in many ways, right? But that notion of history turned on its head, or history re-examined, we were always there, but we were in the but we were in the background, or we're off to the side, or that story of the Promontory Point, the taking of that picture where they were driving the Golden Spike and all the Asian workers are out of the frame, right? And that is so true of what happens to us in Black history. So what other kinds of sources do you draw on? Where else are you find everything is a play? Chuck said that.
I'm a listener. I tend to be the one in the back of the room who maybe nobody notices, but I'm feverishly taking notes and or taking note of sort of key phrases that are being sort of thrown around, tossed around, repeated. So I like to find myself. I mean, actually, COVID has been sort of tough since we can't actually be in groups of people, but I do feel like airports, restaurants, any place that is busy, I love those spaces because I love to eavesdrop. So I do think a lot of my work starts with a line from an eavesdrop. I also feel like some things are inspired by headlines. I am working on a piece right now with Penumbra Theater with Sarah Bellamy, and which is inspired by a New York Times article maybe 2 years ago now about birth rates amongst Black women, and also sort of the dangers, the sort of dangerous the danger is like post-birth, like for the mothers. And Sarah and I sat down and chatted about that. What is that story? And that feels like a really important story to be telling right now about Black women and the medical sort of world, and birth and grieving and mourning. And so we're working on that together right now, which is, you know, very much inspired by the headlines, but has become something that is, I think, deeply personal for like me and my relationship with Penumbra and with Sarah. So there's something really beautiful about how something is this and it becomes this, which hopefully will then speak to this.
Well, there is that, there is no such thing as general art, right? It's all very specific, and in its specificity, it becomes general, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you taught playwriting for a while.
I've done a little teaching. Yes, I was at Kenyon College, which is that's where I went to college, but I was there for a year, I think 2 school years ago. Yes, I did that.
So what did you discover as a playwriting teacher?
Yeah, so I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I was blessed to have incredible students, bright, talented, ambitious. They challenged me to, I think, be a better writer. I also, being a teacher is hard work. I think also if you really are dedicating yourself to your students and their needs, then it's even harder. It takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of energy to be present. And so like I appreciated the challenge. I appreciated like building that muscle, the muscle of being present. I didn't do as much writing during my tenure at Kenyon as I would have liked. I sort of couldn't do my work, and also didn't feel like I could give them what they needed in order to do their best work. So I sort of didn't do my own, but there was something really sort of satisfying about that. And also it's like, I was only there for a year, but also just watching like what those students have done in the 2 years since I've been in the classroom with them is really exciting. Actually, one of my students at Kenyon was the assistant director on Broadbend, a job that he got on his own because he's brilliant. Sean Su, I mean, future of American theater right there. But I loved teaching. I'm going to be teaching a playwriting class at McAllister this coming semester, and I'm really excited to meet those students and to not so much teach them as encourage them, facilitate conversations about ways in. You know, I'm not sure that there are so many things I can teach. I mean, I can teach structure, and you know, I can teach character development in sort of like a larger sense, but I think it's really about encouraging students to take the time to write. It's really, I think, about discipline and time spent and working that muscle.
And also your ideas about being a listener, you know, and how I'm thinking, you said that, and I was thinking about how August Wilson is just, what a great listener, what a great ear to go into the community and just kind of take that in and say, okay, or Susan Laurie Parks or Lynn, you know, I shouldn't say all, but many writers, the ones that I appreciate, are people who go into a space and hear that, and Dominique Morisseau was saying last night, and bring that back to us, and reflect back to us. This is what you're saying. This is what was said in that room, you know?
Yeah, and
so
those writers like has their own cadence. They capture their own people. I mean, Dominique with Detroiters, and August Wilson had the Hill District, and it's like the same way, and it's also incredibly different, and there's a richness and a history to that difference. And yeah, I mean, I think it's really exciting to look at, like right now, there's just so much beautiful work being done on the page, on the stage. and so many different voices, so many different styles and structures, people pushing boundaries, forcing us to look at Black life, especially in brand new ways, which are not new to us, but they are new maybe to a more mainstream audience. And I think there's something really wonderful and exciting, thrilling, inspiring about that. I am so inspired by my fellow playwrights right now. I mean, folks are just upping the game, you know, like you can't come, you have to, like, you can't slouch anymore. Like, you really gotta have a story to tell, and you have to know how you're telling it. And like, that's exciting to me.
Yeah, and have wonderful collaborators out there who are willing to work with you. I'm going to pause here and say that I believe there is an opportunity for people who are watching this to ask questions. So I'm going to put that invitation out there. And if you will type them into the place where you can type them in, I think we can get them. I want to go back to you. The word discipline has come up twice. So tell us about, you know, that's a cue. So what's your practice? Do you try to write, you know, how often? You know, are you using a stylus and a pointy nail, or what you doing over there?
You know, I try to write every day. And I try for some of that writing to be new writing as opposed to editing or emailing, you know. I do prefer like pen and paper first. I still write much of my first drafts of plays in notebooks and then sort of move that material to the computer. I don't edit very well on the computer, like spatially or something. I just get very lost on a screen. So I'm a printer of pages and an editor with a pen on paper. But I do try to spend a chunk of time every day. I'm a morning writer. I am sharpest in the morning. You know, when I was in college, I also had a part-time job at the Tenement Museum, and that job started at like 8 o'clock every day, 8:30, something like that. And so I would get up really early and go to the office and get there at like 6, so I could put in like my 2 hours or 2.5 hours of writing before work started. And that's not so much a practice that I am executing right now, but that same idea, like I feel like I do feel like writing is partially a muscle. Like there's talent, you know, there's ability, there's inspiration, there are all of those things, but I do think that like you have to do it. Even when it feels like a slog, even when you don't like anything that you have committed to the page, I think that it's something you have to work at. So that's always been my approach. It's not terribly flashy and it's not very sexy. It's just like good old fashioned hard work. You know, which I think my father for that, like I think my work ethic comes from both of my parents, but really my dad, who I think for years didn't really understand what I was doing. My dad was like, but you're not sweating. And so if you're not sweating, it's not work. And I think my father has come around. He's like, but it's the time, right? It's the time and it's the effort that you put into doing that thing and the consistency with which you do that thing. Like that's work. So yeah, that's me. I'm just a workhorse. That's no,
I think you share that with many writers, playwrights that I know and have a lot of respect for. Michael Dinwiddie, who you were on with the other day, it's a muscle. You know, it's like being an actor. You got to get up and do your warm up. You got to, you know, you got to keep working, even if it feels crummy and it's not going anywhere. And you know. Yeah. So we have a question in terms of theater, as both an audience member and theater maker, what would you like to see in the future of live theater? Wow.
Well, first I would like it to exist still. So we'll go real basic and
right.
I hope that we can go back to the theaters or gather together. I think the gathering together is it's such an important part of my life, just that like shared experience. I think I would like to see more joy on stage. I think that I think often our work features a trauma, or is unearthing a trauma, or is reliving a trauma. And I think that there's a way to both go back and look at that, and also track the resiliency and celebrate the resiliency. And so I would like to go to the theater and celebrate that, which doesn't mean that like we can't also acknowledge the hardship and the struggle, and even the lingering effects that don't always feel so lingering. But like, I would really love to just laugh and cry and dance and scream, because I'm just like, oh my God, it's me. I like more of that, and I think that that's happening. I think that that's something that Black writers right now, especially, are attempting to do, are pushing that, and I hope that more theaters program that, that we are not stuck in trauma exclusively, that we are pushing forward into the present and into joy, and into like, I think, the full and rich lives that like many of us are living now, whatever our economic background, whatever like our history is. I do feel like we are living, we are here.
Yes.
I think more celebration of that.
Yeah, one of the things I absolutely loved about Broadbend was the end of the first act and the second act were both forward. I mean, not we weren't left with the traumatic events and the concerns, but we had a sense of, and then, and the great question of, and then what, right? So I agree with you. And I so appreciate it when work does that, when it invokes both the joy, the hilarity, and also the sadness and the conflict that goes with that sometimes. Now here's another question.
There are so many writers. I mean, sorry, we can.
No, you go.
I feel like, just off the top of my head, like I feel like Michael R. Jackson is doing that. I think that Robert O'Hara is doing that, like using satire to both point to and also elevate. There are just so many writers who are doing, I think, a masterful job of capturing both of those things and forcing, and we leave the theater like buzzing, both because we just laughed so much, we cried so much, and we have lots of questions and lots of thoughts. And I think that that's exciting. Like, yes, questioning what we thought we knew, questioning what we think we just saw, and engaging with others about that. More of that.
I think we're going to come back to, I think the gathering very soon is going to happen. And there was a piece in the LA Times probably a couple of months ago now, I don't know, what month is this, about how theater was probably going to come back in a more democratic way, that we're probably not coming back to the sort of big houses with lots of people, but in a much smaller, more intimate, communal kind of way, and that will invite more equalization in terms of who the audience is that comes, our opportunity
let's like put that out into the universe. Let's let that happen. Yes, and more yes.
So can you describe your process for rewrites when the play leaves the page and gets into the rehearsal room?
Yeah, so I love rewriting. Editing is my favorite part of the process. I and especially love being in a room with people who are much more brilliant than I am. So I love actors, I love directors and designers, and I truly value that sort of full collaborator collaboration. I am very influenced by who is cast. I feel like my plays are a blueprint. So an actor I think has a lot of power in the sort of conversation about who this character, how they move and what they say. I'm very open to shifting. If something doesn't work on the tongue, then we find something else. I just love that the thing becomes less about me and less about what I thought and more about the we, like what we think together in this room, in this space, in this process together. So I like joy in that part of the process, which I know that that's not necessarily how everybody feels.
Right.
I do think that it's pretty easy to feel like you're a bit under attack because you did all of this work and you made all of these, you were God for so long, and then like you were not the only one in the space with an opinion or with thoughts or with wisdom. But I love not being responsible for it all. I love getting into the room and being able to listen and go, okay, here are the things that really feel like they are true to this collaboration and this moment. And here are the things that felt true to me by myself in my room, but maybe we need to investigate more together. So I don't know if that really answers the question, but I feel like my plays are transformed in the rehearsal room in ways that I think the blood pumps faster, it boils hotter, because of the sort of collaboration and contribution from others.
That's wonderful. There are playwrights who do not necessarily share that. Who would much rather, have more control over the project and deliver it.
I mean, I feel like and I don't. This isn't to like demean myself in any way, but I rarely think of myself as the most knowledgeable person in the room. I'm bringing sort of the beginnings of a conversation, but I didn't write to the end of that conversation, like I only wrote what I was able to write. And I don't know that I just have never written to the end of the conversation. Like that's why productions are so important, I think, because like the thing is not the thing until there are others. And so I think if I come into the process thinking that I've already done it, like it's already the play that it will always be, then I've sort of not allowed anyone else to do the thing that they have been trained to do. And I have not been trained to do anything other than write. And like, sometimes I wonder about that. So I welcome the help and the support and the inspiration from others.
Yeah. And that's when the best collaborations happen, is when everyone's in the room and everyone gets to play.
Connected too. Like there's a sense of ownership from everyone. Like the actors feel like, I've got this. I know this. I'm the one that provided this perspective and shifted the narrative. The director feels good about like the stamp that they were able to put on it. Like the designers feel like we listened to their concerns about the way it was going to be lit or the sound, or like it, then it feels like a team. It feels like a family. It feels like we all contributed to this thing and now we all have a stake in it. And I love that feeling. I love when everybody is breathing together because you were all there and you all put your hands in there, I love that.
Yeah. So what would you share with your colleagues, for your fellow writers? Or the writers behind you, let's call them the writers who are coming up underneath you. What words of advice would you have? Or sharing about the experience of being a writer working?
Yeah, I was having a conversation last night, and I started by saying I don't even know where I am, like in the whatever. I have no idea, but I do feel like something that's always been important to me, or a couple of things that have always been important to me, are number one, to read, to read as much as you can. I also think to write as much as you can, to figure out when is writing best for you? Are you a morning writer, an afternoon writer? Do you write late at night? But I think putting in the time and like creating pages is really important. So working that muscle. I think also, and especially now, I think reaching out to others who are doing work that you are inspired by. I think we should all be talking to each other wherever we are. And I have benefited so much from conversations with writers who I felt were ahead of me, you know, and the wisdom of their experience, their stories. Dale Orlander Smith was my mentor on my thesis project at Columbia, and the tough love that I received from her like changed how I sort of went out into the world after graduation. So I feel like find a way to reach out, whether it's through Facebook or Instagram, or you get their email somehow, or I think reaching out and having conversations, like that's how we've always shared information, you know, we've always told stories, we've always shared experiences, and that I think has strengthened the next generation, given them the tools they need to do it better and easier. You know, like if I had to struggle with XYZ, maybe you don't have to do that. And that means that you can fly a little higher, perhaps. And I think that's a good thing. So yeah, read, write, and reach out, I think are my sort of like
wonderful.
3 basic things.
So before we run out of time, I have 2 more questions, but I'm going to ask one and then I'm going to ask the other one. So here's, this one came in and I'm going to rephrase it. How do you speak music? Because you work with composers. So how does that happen? What are your favorite practices when you work with composers?
Sure. Well, so I feel like I benefit a little bit from playing instruments growing up. So I played the piano and played the violin and the viola, and sang like all through my sort of young years into college. So I'm not a musician. Those are not skills that I would continue, like that I would claim, but I do have a background. I read music, and I think I have a musical sensibility that is also reflected in my writing. So I do think that it's a language that I can like somewhat speak, not fluently, but enough of it that I can sort of understand what's going on. I think I have been very fortunate to collaborate with incredibly talented people who are also incredibly patient and articulate about what they do. So Jacob Yandura, Douglas Lyons, and Ethan Pakchar, these composers, Ted Shin, these composers who are so good at what they do and understand that the collaboration will work better if I understand what they do to the extent that it affects what I do. So I think it's really just about communication. It's about being able to say, you know, I don't really understand this, or I have a hunch, I have a feeling, will you entertain that feeling? So I think most things are about communication. I think most things are about finding people who take you seriously, and who you can dialogue with freely and openly and honestly. So in my work with composers, I feel like my work has been elevated because they have communicated with me what is best for them, and I have communicated with them what I think is best for me. And like the marriage of those two, I think has yielded some really beautiful results.
Wow, excellent. Well, and you played the piano, all right. So
I mean, nothing you could do now. I could locate middle C. Like that's what I could do.
To the left of 2 black notes, right? Okay.
I got middle C.
So talk a little bit about what's next. I know today the Black Theater Network, as part of Black Theater Week, is doing a curated series of monologues and scenes, and I believe you have a work that's going to be part of that
I do.
event this afternoon at 3 o'clock Eastern time. And then what? Tell us about those two things.
Yeah, so I submitted an excerpt from a brand new play that I'm working on with Williamstown Theater Festival called We Are Continuous. And I believe that John Morrison, who I am such a fan of, is delivering my piece, my monologue. And the piece is about a mother and a son's relationship over time, dealing with the son's sexuality and also with a positive HIV diagnosis and the ways in which their relationship grows and changes over time, and the ways in which that diagnosis especially leads to a sort of cracking open of their relationship in I think, a really beautiful way. So John will be doing a monologue from that piece, and I'm working on that with Williamstown at present. And then I'm working on a handful of other projects. We are adding a third part to Broadbend, Arkansas, that I am working on with Theater Latte Da in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I have a play with music about Gordon Parks that I am working on with the History Theater here in St. Paul. And as I mentioned before, this piece called Weathering that I'm developing with Penumbra. So a number of pieces, they all are sort of a piece. They feature Black folks. They are stories of triumph, I think. And that's really exciting to me, the idea of triumph and joy.
Gordon Parks, is he a Minneapolis native?
He spent some time in St. Paul. He's actually from Kansas, and I grew up with my parents invoking the name of Gordon Parks, especially once I said that I wanted to be an artist or that it seemed like I was artistically inclined. His work was often referenced, and but yes, so he's like important to me from a Kansas perspective and important to me from a St. Paul, Minnesota perspective, and just a great artist. And
Yeah.
I mean, someone who has stated, I had the option to pick up a gun or a pen or a camera, right? And I chose the camera. And that is the way that I was able to sort of tell my story and to shed light on the plight, on the situation around me, and to find a kind of freedom. So
is this your first sort of biographical person? I mean, they're all biographical in investigative ways, but is this the first foray into that a very personalized kind of history as opposed to a history around a period?
It might be. My first piece with History Theater here in St. Paul was about a man who lives in the Twin Cities, a Somali man. And I actually worked with him to tell his own story. So this sort of like biographical work is really intriguing to me. Like, how do you take someone who we maybe know or who like a community knows, and how do we unearth that, maybe tip it on its head a little bit? Like, what's the point of view? What can we learn now from a life that was lived largely in a different time? It's a lot of fun because you want it to not feel dusty or stodgy. You want it to feel new and relevant. And so, how do you get there? What do you do to get there? Like, it's a great challenge.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, are there other? I'm checking the chat to see if I have other questions here. Wonderful. So, it looks like we're coming to the end of our time together. It's what is over there. So you are currently in Minneapolis, in St. Paul, in that area?
Yeah. It's a lovely place to be.
Lots of theaters there.
lots of theaters, lots of really wonderful people. You can see the sky. It's very green. It's, you know, I lived in New York for 10 years, and I mean, I love New York City. I think I just need a little bit more room and a little more air.
I understand.
So it's been really nice to be here. And also New York City is great to visit. Like, it's lovely to show up now. And I'm like, I know how the subways work, so.
Well, it has been a serious joy talking to you.
This is so fun, Kathryn.
Thank you so much. And I am so excited for you, not only about Broadbend, Arkansas, but now that I've sort of met you through that work, about encountering the other plays. And I will tell you, in looking at at your playlist, there were several that I said, how come I don't know this? How come I've never seen this one? Which I guess is the unfortunate news about this time is that we don't have the opportunity to really be together.
Right.
But the good news is that we have the time and the wherewithal to become aware in other ways. I am so glad that the Black Theater has you as a writer who is writing so many different voices, so many perspectives. I wish you much continued success as you keep doing that, and I look forward to my next encounter with your next play, and maybe we'll happen out here somewhere.
Yeah,
and I want to again thank the Transport Group Theater for making this conversation possible, for their generosity in encouraging donations to the Black Theater Network, an organization near and dear to my heart because of its connection to writers like you and artists and theater makers throughout the world who are helping to keep the Black storytelling tradition alive and well. Hannah, I'm going to give you a very special thank you for your technical consult in putting this together. And oops. And I guess that's
dramatic conclusion.
And that was my dramatic. There's a button on the number. Thank you all so much for watching. The conversations with Transport Group Theater will continue. I understand that next week there's another kind of conversation planned. I hope you will continue to be supporters of this Transport Group Theater, of the Black Theater Network, of theater everywhere, however it happens right now, knowing that we will be back and we will be even better, right?
That's right.
When we come back.